Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, things adjacent. Thanks for all your comments and discussion on the last video. So I guess those articles ended up being more interesting as a discussion point for a lot of people. The gasoline being a waste product ended up being new information for a lot of people, as it was for me. So that's, ended up being somewhat educational, and I'm happy about that. Also, the chaff article I thought was quite interesting. A lot of people alerted me to the fact that chaff is larger pieces of aluminum or whatever it is that they throw out of the plane. So therefore, it's not something that you would like breathe in or whatever, but throwing things out of a plane in the air, I think, has some kind of pollutive or pollution element. Just by its own action. Whatever you're throwing on the ground, you don't know where it's landing, you don't know where it's going, you don't know where it's hitting, you don't know who it's affecting. There's also I forget the guy's name that I used to actually talk about him a little bit, but he's on the East Coast, South Carolina, who used to do, I used to link some videos of his, and he was talking about nuclear fallout and pollution, and the fact that they release chemicals into the air whenever they launch rockets. There's quite a bit of like tracer elements in order for them to study certain effects on the atmosphere. And whenever we launch a rocket into space, satellites quite often have lots of fallout, lots of chemical fallout as far as pollution. I'm kind of ranging wide here about what I'm talking about, but overall, the picture is one of pollution and destruction, and things that probably shouldn't be in the air are in the air, have been put in the air, have been blown up, have been put in the stratosphere, have been put in the troposphere. All over the place, there is widespread destruction and pollution. So these are things that should be stopped. Definitely. And if we're talking about, hold on one second. If we were talking about actual geoengineering, obviously these programs probably won't have great effects in the long run. Whatever their upsides, they're going to be probably short-lived, and most likely carry with them their own consequences. The problem is that we don't have, as the article stated that I read the other day, we don't have time for R&D necessarily, although I would highly support lots of R&D if we're going to do stuff like that, because the path of least destruction and danger is probably the one that we should take, if we're trying to save ourselves. There's just some basic logic in that. Anyways, way too much to cover today. As usual, way too much going on. I'm going to see what I can see in the short amount of time that I have to see it. This is from BuzzFeed News. A huge climate change movement led by teenage girls is sweeping Europe, and it's coming to the U.S. next. Students are going on strike around the world to demand action on climate change, and a movement led almost entirely by teenage girls. This is from February 7th. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm just going to, you already get the general idea. But a huge student protest movement led almost exclusively by teenage girls and young women is sweeping Europe, and it's on the brink of breaking through in the U.S. So far this year, tens of thousands of high school-age students in Belgium, Germany, and Sweden have boycotted class and protested against climate change. The loose movement's inspiration, a 16-year-old girl who began a solitary picket last year outside the Swedish parliament in Stockholm, has compared the protest to the March for Our Lives movement organized by the Parkland teens in the wake of a shooting at their school that left 17 dead. In the latest mass climate strikes, large crowds took to the streets in The Hague on Thursday in the largest such protest in the Netherlands so far. The teens leading the climate strike across the border in Belgium were in Leuven, the country's 8th largest city, where they told BuzzFeed News they had 12,000 people on the streets in one of the many actions across the country. So I'm reading this article because someone sent me, was it Jeff? I'm forgetting who sent it to me. Sent me a Facebook page where they listed all of the climate protests or actions going on, and they're quite extensive in the last few months, involving 5, 6, possibly 10 nations. And obviously we know about Extinction Rebellion. So this is a good sign. People are waking up as we progress. Definitely in 2019, we are going to see this become more mainstream news. And with the Green New Deal and AOC keeping it on the front lines, on the headlines, this is a good thing. This is a great thing. Look for people to be, obviously you're going to have, the Fox News and even the mainstream news kind of trying to play it down as much as they possibly can, because we don't want to scare people, do we? And we don't want to lose ratings, and we want to keep selling people things. So this absolutely will be pushed to the bottom or the back of the pile as much as possible. Farm Belt, I'm going to move on to another article, and I'm not going to cover this whole thing, but just give you some quick snips. Farm Belt bankruptcies are soaring. A wave of bankruptcies is sweeping the U.S. Farm Belt as trade disputes add pain to the low commodity prices that have been grinding down American farmers for years. Throughout much of the Midwest, U.S. farmers are filing for Chapter 12 bankruptcy protection at levels seen for at least a decade. A Wall Street Journal review of federal data shows. This is from MSN.com, but it says Wall Street Journal at the top, so I'm not sure where the actual source of this is. Bankruptcies in 3 regions covering major farm states last year rose to the highest level in at least 10 years. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, had double the bankruptcies in 2018 compared with 2008. In the Eighth Circuit, which includes states from North Dakota to Arkansas, bankruptcies swelled 96%. The 10th Circuit, which covers Kansas and other states last year, had 59% more bankruptcies than a decade earlier. States in those circuits accounted for nearly half of all sales of U.S. farm products in 2017, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture data. The rise in farm bankruptcies represents a reckoning for rural America, which has suffered a multi-year slump in prices for corn, soybeans, and other farm commodities, touched off by a worldwide glut, made worse by growing competition from agriculture powerhouses such as Russia and Brazil. So we have a glut of commodities right now. Trade disputes under the Trump administration with major buyers of U.S. farm goods, such as China and Mexico, have further roiled agricultural markets and pressured farmers' incomes. Prices for soybeans and hogs plummeted after those countries retaliated against U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs by imposing duties on U.S. products like oilseeds and pork, slashing shipments to big buyers. Low milk prices are driving dairy farmers out of business in a market that's also struggling with retaliatory tariffs on U.S. cheese from Mexico and China. Tariffs on U.S. pork have helped contribute to the record buildup in U.S. meat supplies, leading to lower prices for beef and chicken. Okay. Interesting. I don't know. I've heard from some commenters, and I also will say that it looks to me like prices seem to be going up at the grocery store. So if we have this glut of commodities and this glut of meat, I don't see it I do buy meat, even though I don't eat meat. I buy meat for other people in my household. Generally fairly expensive, as with produce and pretty much everything else in the store. Which, makes you realize that it's all manufactured. A free market is not necessarily a free market. With oil, prices being as low as they are, gasoline prices should be at like $1.50 around the country, or $2, maybe $2.50 at the most, on the West Coast, where we have quite expensive gas. But of course, everything is inflated, is not running on, markets. We have this surplus of oil, and, the U.S. is producing more oil than ever before, and yet we're still at $3 a gallon here. So those are artificially inflated prices. And we can go, the reasons why are probably too long to discuss right this second. Something new from the Arctic News. This is from February 7th. Extinction Alert. Red lights flashing. Extinction Alert. Above image confirms an earlier analysis that it was 1.73 C warmer than pre-industrial in 2018. So countering the idea that we're still at 1.1 or 1.2 or 1 C, which the mainstream scientists and or studies try to keep telling us. The image also shows that it could become 1.85 C warmer in 2019. So, this graph, hockey stick graph, the one that we always see everywhere all the time, looking like we possibly could get to 2 by 2021 on this graph. When would we get to 3C? 2025 or so, or 26. This according to the nonlinear trend red line that follows from the data and also follows the data better than the blue linear trend, which also follows from the data but is out of line with recent temperature rise. So the blue line is just, linear straight across. And this is what is generally reported, that, we're at just above 1, and we're going to see 1, possibly 1.5 by 2033, it looks like here, or 1.5 by 2035 ish. Data are adjusted for a number of reasons. The first reason is a baseline issue. At the Paris Agreement, nations pledged to ensure that the temperature rise would not cross 1.5 C above pre-industrial. Accordingly, data should reflect a 1750 baseline. The default baseline for the NASA Land Ocean Temperature Index is 1951 to 1980. So a little bit of a difference there. The above image features 2 maps. Let's move the baseline up to 1992. Then we're only 0.5 or whatever. The difference is 0.25 C. In other words, using 1900 as a baseline would require a 0.25 C adjustment. That figure of 0.25 C is conservative, firstly, because 2018 was a La Nina year. Furthermore, as above image illustrates, the period from 1900 to 1920 was almost 0.3 C below 1951 to 1980. Anyway, the conservative figure of 0.25 C is used in this analysis. Additional adjustment of the data is needed. In order to reflect a 1750 baseline, the total baseline adjustment could add up to as much as 0.55 C, as discussed in an earlier post. Furthermore, the large area in the Arctic on the above map on the right reflects a lack of measurements in the Arctic that go back to 1900. So, hold on. Okay, I'm just looking at this graph and trying to get a little more clarification, but I can't. Hold on. Finally, NASA LOTI data are for air temperatures over land and for sea surface water temperatures for oceans to get an idea of how much the temperature of the atmosphere has risen close to the surface. It makes more sense to use air surface temperatures over oceans rather than sea surface water temperatures, resulting in another additional adjustment of 0.1 C. The total adjustment adds up to 0.75 C, resulting in the graph below. The final step in this analysis is a projection from the future. In the image at the top, the trend is extended to the year 2033, but the vertical axis doesn't go beyond 5C warming. Why 5C? A recent study looked at the plant temperature tolerances and concluded that extinction will already occur far earlier than when upper tolerance levels were reached for individual species. Since loss of one species can make more species disappear, a process known as co-extinction, and possibly bring entire systems to an unexpected regime shift or even total collapse. There was a small group of species with large tolerance limits to remarkable resistance to environmental change, but even they could not survive co-extinctions. In fact, their extinction was abrupt and happened far from their tolerance limits and close to global biodiversity collapse at around 5C of heating. It's, you know, at 4C, it's bad times at the OK Corral. Most likely at 2.5 or 3 that we're already, because we're right now arguably anywhere between 1.1 and 1.7, and we're seeing major shifts in weather. We're already seeing major melting of all ice. So, you know, double that and you get double the fun. Importantly, the image at the top doesn't even depict the worst case scenario in the sense that the non-linear trend merely follows from the data, i.e. it doesn't take into account tipping points such as abrupt disappearance of the Arctic sea ice or sudden eruptions of methane from the seafloor of the Arctic Ocean. A rapid 5C rise could occur if an influx of warm, salty water triggered methane eruptions from the seafloor of the Arctic Ocean. Combined with snow and ice loss, it could rapidly raise temperatures by 1.5 C, which increases water vapor. Hold on. See, this is what happens. Hold on. Combined with snow and ice loss, it could rapidly raise temperatures to 1.5 C. If cloud feedback is strongly positive, water vapor feedback can lead to 3.5 times as much warming. So these warming elements alone could cause 5C warming within years. Then, of course, there are further warming elements. The situation is dire. Calls for a comprehensive and effective action as described in the climate plan, which is weird, but maybe check it out if you want to. And, oh, you know what I forgot to cover is this weird, strange, bizarre article from Fast Company. This new clothing line is designed for life after the apocalyptic climate change. Fireproof jackets, smoke filtering bandanas, storm warning headphones. The unfortunately ready-to-wear collection highlights how we'll have to adapt if we don't stop climate change. If you visit Milk Gallery in New York during Fashion Week instead of the runway shows that the space usually hosts, you'll see a new line of clothing designed for the reality of climate change. A jacket is fireproof and water resistant. A hood that pairs with the jacket has a mosquito net face mask to protect from infectious diseases. Solar-powered headphones give storm warnings. A bandana with interchangeable filters protects against smoke during fires. A backpack doubles as a sleeping bag for someone forced to flee their home with a removable side that filters water. The conceptual line, called Unfortunately Ready to Wear, was a collaboration between Milk Studios designer Luca Sabat and the Natural Resources Defense Council, a nonprofit better known for suing the Trump administration to enforce environmental laws than for most garments. We're going at this from a different angle than I think most environmental organizations have ever done, said Ria Su, president of NRDC. Honestly, I think we need to be a lot more creative about how we reach out to new audiences. So yeah, bring those, bring your fashion savvy friends into the climate change fold by having some ready to wear disaster fashion show up at their show up with their cheese and wine gatherings. The design responds to the reality of the extreme weather caused by climate change, but the purpose is not to show how we'll have to adapt, but it's aspects of future dystopia we can still avoid. So I'm going to link this below. There's a funny picture of somebody trying to drink water out of like a muddy hole in a really fashionable looking disaster jacket, designed to wake people up. But hey, I guess you gotta figure out ways to open people's eyes to this, because people want to avert or want to just live in their bubbles. You ever meet somebody and you think they're pretty cool, and then you overhear a phone conversation they have with somebody else, and you're like, "Ooh, yuck!" And I had one of those moments yesterday. I met somebody who I thought was cool, and then she got on the phone, was talking about her trip to Vegas, and just, we're staying at the Trop. Ooh, like, it was just the most disgusting, entitled, like Los Angeles conversation you could ever imagine, but just totally normal for most. Most people would be like, "Oh yeah, the Trop, yuck. Oh, I'd never go there. I'd never stay there. Oh, gross." Just whatever. Just people are really, really, really out of touch, and think that everything's gonna be, that's the way to be. That's the way to live. That's acceptable. That's desirable. That's okay. Lastly, in this video, I want to cover an article from George Monbiot from February 1st, 2019, called "Waste Colonialism." The UK government is flagrantly flouting its own rules, allowing... All right, it's not playtime. The UK government is flagrantly flouting its own rules, allowing our scrap tires to be sent to India for burning. What we see is not the economy. What we see is the tiny fragment of economic life we are supposed to see. The products and services we buy, the rest, the mines, plantations, factories, and dumps required to deliver and remove them, are kept as far from our minds as possible. Given the scale of global extraction and waste disposal, it is a remarkable feat of perception management. The recent enthusiasm for plastic porn, footage of the disgusting waste pouring into the sea, is a rare reminder that we are still living in a material world. But it has no meaningful effect on government policy. When China banned imports of plastic waste a year ago, you might have hoped that the UK government would invest heavily in waste reduction and domestic recycling. Instead, it has sought new outlets for our filth. Among the lucky recipients are Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, none of which have adequate disposal systems. As I write, our plastic is doubtless flooding into their seas. There's a term for this practice: waste colonialism. Or colonialized waste, I don't know. Our plastic exports are bad enough, but something even worse is happening that we don't see at all. Every month, thousands of tons of used tires leave our ports on a passage to India. They are baked in pyrolysis plants to make a dirty industrial fuel. Oh, hey, it's raining. Glad I just washed my car. Yeah. Where are we? To make a dirty industrial fuel. While some of these plants, so they're making the tires into fuel. Awesome. To make a dirty, while some of these plants meet Indian regulations, hundreds, perhaps thousands, are pouring filth into the air. As officials look the other way, when tire pyrolysis is done badly, it can produce a hideous mix of toxins, heavy metals, benzene, dioxins, furans, and other persistent organic chemicals, some of which are highly carcinogenic. Videos of tire pyrolysis in India show black smoke leaking from the baking chamber, and workers in T-shirts without masks or any other protective equipment cleaning tarry residues out of the pipes and flasks. I can only imagine what their life expectancy might be. India suffers one of the world's worst pollution crises that cause massive rates of disease and early death. There is no data on the contribution No data on the contribution made by tire pyrolysis plants, but it is doubtless significant. Nor do we know whether British tires are being burnt in illegal plants there. As our government has failed to investigate, it seems prepared to break its own rules on behalf of the companies exporting our waste. And this is before Brexit. Right. Of course. And that's the whole idea between all, offshoring or exporting all of our all of our manufacturing and now our waste to other countries. Just don't look at it. We don't see it. Unlike plastic waste, there is a ready market for used tires within the UK. They are or were compressed into tight blocks to make road foundations, embankments, and drainage beds. It's not the closed loop recycling that should be applied to everything we consume, let alone the radical reduction in the use of materials required to prevent environmental breakdown, but it's much better than what's happening to our discarded tires now. The companies that made these blocks have either collapsed or are in danger of going that way. As they can no longer buy scrap tires, Indian pyrolysis plants pay more. I was contacted by a leading tire block broker, David L. Reed. He was halfway through a major order from a local authority when his supplies dried up. The contract was lost and the local authority had to switch to stone, costing it a further £200,000. He has other interests, so is able to weather this disruption, but his company, like others, has had to cease trading. With some of his competitors, he has been frantically trying to discover what the government is playing at, so far with little success. Government guidelines seems clear enough. Exporters must be able to demonstrate that the final destination of the waste they send to other countries operates to human health and environmental protection standards that are broadly equivalent to the standards within the EU. Hardy har. But when one tire block company tested the UK Environment Agency's willingness to enforce this rule by asking whether it could send tires to pyrolysis plants in Africa that will not meet the UK and EU pollution controls, the agency told him, your suggested business plan is acceptable as long as the relevant procedures and documents are completed correctly. The UK government's due diligence consists of asking tire exporters which companies they intend to sell to, then asking the Indian government whether those companies are legit. It has made no efforts to discover whether the firms receiving these tires are their final destination or whether the Indian government is properly regulating them, and it has no figures for UK tire exports to India. Arguing that they are classed as green waste, it washes its hands of them as soon as they leave our shores. To become a tire trader, all you need to do is fill in a U2 environmental exemption form. Then you can buy used tires from garages, ostensibly for bundling into construction blocks, but there appears to be nothing in British law, or at least in its implementation, to prevent you from using this license to put them in a shipping container and send them to India. I sent questions to the government about these issues, but despite repeated requests, it failed to send me a response on time. Reed has approached Michael Gove, his labor shadow, Sue Heyman, Liam Fox, and other MPs and officials, all without answers. Does anyone care? Are the lives of the people in India worth nothing to the politicians in this country? It appears that among the first people to export used tires to India in 2009 was Richard Cook. He is the former Conservative parliamentary candidate for East Renfrewshire, who channeled £435,000, whose origins remain mysterious, through Northern Ireland and into the Leave campaign in England and Scotland. Investigations by Open Democracy and the BBC Northern Ireland alleged that his shipment was classified as illegal by both the Indian government and the UK regulators. Indian law at the time forbade used tire imports. Cook denied the allegations, and after I tried to speak to him, his solicitor rang to say, we have intimated a claim for damages against the BBC for defamation and will not be making further comment. In principle, the government could be held to account by these issues by European law. But if this is the way it is prepared to operate before Brexit, flouting its own rules on behalf of British exporters, imagine what it might do after we have left the EU. Every child is taught a basic environmental principle. You clean up your own mess. Our government seems happy to dump it on other people. And that is how it is going all over the planet. Just export the damage, export the waste, bury it, cover it up, put it over here where people can't see it. And all of this is allowable. You know, there are laws in place to guard against this kind of stuff. But of course, you know, if you're in a third world country or a country where regulations are flimsy at best, then, you know, carry on. Very, very interesting. This is why nationalization of climate plans or climate mitigation should happen as soon as possible, because if the free market or money is the thing that's controlling this, whether something is profitable or not, it's not going to happen, because it's not profitable, and it needs to be subsidized by the government. It needs to be overseen by the government. It needs to just happen. Like, here you go. Here's the money. Here's how it's going to work, and whatever. If, you know, somebody can possibly use the funds from these activities for greater good, then, you know, wonderful. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. I'm going to get out into this rain and go to work. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so with the links below. Until next time, peace.